presenting our study on mediators and moderators of excessive social media use and psychological distress.
So kind of to start off, just to give you a little bit of background, so social media is clearly an extremely relevant topic in today's society. And previous research has shown that excessive use of social media is associated with a whole bunch of various types of psychological distress, including depression, anxiety, fear of missing out, and many others. In our study, we specifically wanted to explore the potential moderating roles that need to belong at general belongingness and social comparison orientation may have had on the relationship between excessive social media use and psychological distress. Just for some general insight, a moderator is any variable that changes or alters the relationship between two other variables. And then additionally, we looked at the potential mediating role of anxiety in the relationship of social media addiction and sleep quality. And a mediator is anything that sort of carries a relationship between two variables.
So social media has been linked to a range of negative consequences such as poor sleep and poor mental health. Studies have reported that increased social media use at night before sleep is associated with more sleep disturbances. It has also been found that engaging in social media before bedtime might also replace and reduce sleep and increase cognitive and emotional arousal, making it difficult to mentally switch off. There was also a study by Das Friebel and colleagues that examined bedtime social media use, sleep, and effective well-being using an experience sampling methodology with the aim of establishing a day-to-day temporal link between variables. So this study hypothesized a positive association between increased bedtime social media use and lower effective well-being the following day, mediated by poorer sleep. They used daily questionnaires assessing the previous night's bedtime social media use, sleep duration, and satisfaction, and momentary effective well-being for 14 consecutive days. So they found that increased bedtime social media use was not associated with poorer sleep the same night. And so to conclude further, the study found that bedtime social media use is not detrimental to the sleep and effective well-being of young adults. But however, Das Friebel and colleagues did note that it is possible that bedtime social media use may be harmful to the sleep of vulnerable individuals.
A little bit more background, specifically in relation to need to belong and general belongingness. A theoretical perspective that kind of highlights this relationship is Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, which is widely known in the field of psychology. And as you can see up there on the middle, in the third tier, that's where he places belongingness, stressing its importance in the sense that it is a fundamental human need. There was one study conducted by Wang and colleagues that ended up finding that the need to belong has been found to positively predict how people portray themselves on social networking sites. So taking that into account, we can then gather that someone who would score high on need to belong would make more of an effort to portray themselves in a more appealing light on social media, whereas someone low on need to belong may not put forth as much effort in doing so. And then there was one other study by Nadkarni and Hoffman that proposed that the need to belong may be a driving force behind why people engage in certain forms of social media use. They specifically looked at Facebook, but it could be generalized to all social media platforms.
Another mediator we looked at was social comparison orientation. Social comparison theory was a theory initially proposed by social psychologist Leon Festinger in 1954, and it centers on the belief that there is a drive within individuals to gain accurate self-evaluations. People tend to determine their own personal worth based on how they measure up against others, and tend to focus on qualities such as perceived attractiveness, life satisfaction, and popularity when they engage in social comparison. So as we all know, people tend to present the best versions of themselves and their lives on social media, which increases upward comparison's need, which leads to people feeling a lot worse about themselves. People high in this orientation are potentially more likely to be drawn to social media because it offers abundant social comparison opportunities, and they're more likely to be negatively affected by the upward social comparisons made on social media.
So to reiterate, the purpose of the present study is to explore the relationship between social media and common forms of psychological distress, including anxiety, depression, perceived stress, sleep difficulties, and fear of missing out. So we intend to explore the moderating effects of social comparison, need to belong, and general belongingness, and we also tend to explore the mediating effects of anxiety.
Okay, so the three of us went in slightly different directions in our research, which resulted in 3 different hypotheses. The first hypothesis was that the present study seeks to examine the moderating role of social comparison orientation between the documented relationship of social media use and psychological distress. Specifically, we hypothesize that people higher in this orientation will experience more psychological distress when engaging in high rates of social media usage.
Our second hypothesis is that social media addiction will have an indirect effect on sleep quality through elevated anxiety.
And then the final hypothesis is that need to belong as well as general belongingness will moderate the relationship between excessive social media use and psychological distress. And more specifically, we expect that people who are high on need to belong will be more at risk for engaging in problematic social media use and also in turn being more negatively affected by it. And then conversely, we expect people who already have a general sense that they do belong will be less affected by this relationship.
All right, so essentially what we did was we sent out a survey to about 250 undergraduate students at Grove City College. This survey included questions from the Bergen Social Media Addiction Scale, which included questions like thought about how you could free more time to spend on social media, the fear of missing out scale, for example, I fear others have more rewarding experiences than me, the depression, anxiety, stress scale, also known as the DAS, which is I find myself getting upset by quite trivial things. Also, we have the Iowa Netherlands Comparison Orientation Scale. I often compare how I'm doing socially with other people. The General Belongingness Scale, when I'm with other people, I feel included. The Need to Belong Scale, if other people don't seem to accept me, I don't let it bother me. And the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, during the past month, how would you rate your sleep quality overall? Okay, so for social comparison orientation, we created a dichotomous grouping variable for social comparison based on a median split. So you can see the red line there represents people higher in social comparison orientation, and the blue line represents the group lower in that orientation. So in the analysis involving anxiety as a dependent variable, the interaction between addiction and social comparison was marginally significant. This figure presents the relationship between addiction and anxiety separately by social comparison group. So at low levels, you can see there's not much of a difference, but as addiction levels increase, so does anxiety. And people higher in social comparison orientation are clearly more affected, as indicated by the red line.
So in this second figure here, when we are talking about social media addiction, anxiety, and sleep quality, we see that as addiction increases, so does anxiety, and as anxiety increases, sleep quality decreases. So we know that social media addiction has an effect on sleep quality, but when mediated by anxiety, social media addiction has a significant indirect effect on sleep quality.
And then this third figure here, once again, we did make another dichotomous grouping variable for need to belong based on a median split. As you can see, the variables that we used are social media addiction as well as anxiety. And you can see that as addiction increases, so does anxiety overall. Also, you can see as the red line, which indicates people who score high on need to belong, are clearly more affected by this relationship than the blue line, which represents people who score low on need to belong. And then overall, the interaction between addiction and anxiety was marginally significant. We did find what we expected to find in regard to one predicting the other, but it did not quite reach statistical significance.
So to discuss, some limitations in our research include demographics, size, and profile, due to only using Grove City College students, which is further limited to primarily Caucasian students. Also, COVID-19 may have had affected the results, considering that people have spent an excessive time on social media. The Digital Commerce 360, which is a leading media and research organization, surveyed 4,500 Americans about how much they've been using social media during the pandemic, and 72% of the respondents reported that they had a great increase in their social media consumption.
So there's definitely some areas for future research, further explorations of associations, social media use, sleep patterns, belongingness, and social comparison orientation. Considering the indirect effect that social media addiction had on sleep quality through elevated anxiety, the findings may provide new paths to understand the detrimental effect of excessive social media use toward corresponding psychological outcomes. Testing social comparison orientation using a larger and more diverse sample may also help us lead to more significant results. Additionally, testing need to belong and general belongingness among religious and non-religious people to see if there are differences may yield significant results.
So, what does this mean and how can we apply this for the real world? So, although excessive social media use is generally associated with bad outcomes, it's obviously going to affect people differently. So not every single person who uses social media is going to experience these same negative outcomes or the intensity of the negative outcomes. And just in general, there are individual factors that can kind of impact this relationship, including need to belong, belongingness, and social comparison that all play a significant role and are different for other people.
So to further conclude what this means for the real world, we really hope that this research will make a valuable contribution to the field of psychology and our understanding of the negative effects of social media use, in which individuals are most susceptible in a generation increasingly more reliant upon social media. Thank you.
Woo!